Welcome back to Spirit Spells and Magic. It's Halloween. It's Beltane. And it's both. In the Southern Hemisphere, it is both. We had Samhain on April 30th, May 1st. So now it's the opposite, Beltane for us. And it's not autumn here, we're still in spring. Confused? Well, it is quite confusing. Down under. It is spring here for one last month, although you wouldn't have really noticed spring being here, as the past month and several weeks have mainly been gloomy and rainy. It's kind of been like that for most of this year. I can't remember many sunny days or many weeks when we had a lot of sun in a row. It seems that it's been a really wet year, and I think we can blame the El Nino for that. But it hasn't helped our little garden grow very well. When we planted things back in August, we were hoping by now things would be really flourishing, but they still kind of look like little seedlings that haven't really grown, and that was because we didn't get much sun, and a lot of the time they've spent time indoors. So unfortunately, it didn't really work for us this year, and we'll probably not plant so early in Sydney next year. Just in case, we'll probably be more likely to start just from spring, which will be September for us. Unfortunately, it has meant that we've had a couple of casualties in our little garden. They haven't made it into the garden bed yet, as it's been too rainy to set it up. So a lot of them have been moved around and transplanted into bigger containers in longing for the sun to come out. But we've been battling on, and it's time to celebrate because it's Beltane and the sun has finally come out, and it's not gone back away the next day. It seems to have, at least for a couple of days now, been out all day, and the plants are loving it. We've planted some new seeds, and hopefully this will get the start that they all need to really get us to harvest, probably autumn now. I don't know if many of them will actually be ready to harvest in summer, considering it's pretty much November now, our last month of spring, and we'll only have 4 months now, which a lot of plants will come to harvest in 4 months, but hopefully at least by February, March, we'll have some really good things coming out. I was hoping that I could take some food to Christmas in December, but I just think that's, maybe a couple of tomatoes. That might be all I'm able to take from the little harvest we're going to have, but we'll see how we go. It might surprise us. Now, Beltane is the Sabbath of fertility and celebration. It's been so cold traditionally up until this point. We had a star last, and that was the beginnings of spring. And now by Beltane, well, not in Australia anyway, not in Sydney, it should be in full swing. The warmth, the heat, everybody's excited, and a lot of the time the males and females are particularly frisky, and a lot of babies are conceived at this time, traditionally. Not in this household. Definitely not in the garden, not up until this point anyway. We've had very little growth, so to speak. Beltane in Old Irish Celtic means bright lights, and traditionally they would set bonfires and do crazy things like jumping over the fire and proving how manly they were, the men, and the women. They'd have the maypole, which was because traditionally Beltane is the 1st of May. They'd erect a long pole and dance around it for fertility and celebration of spring and getting ready to go into summer. The Oak King too is now in his element. He rules now until the autumn equinox, which for us it's a while away from now. So he's got full reign. The girls would assemble wreaths out of flowers and put a lot of the flowers in their hair and daisy chains and that kind of thing. But around here, because it's been so wet and not a lot of sun, we don't have a lot of flowers. I mean, we've got plenty of dandelions. Those are about the only things that grow around here when there's no sun. I don't know how they do it, but they were growing before we even got to spring in late winter. So quite interesting. But the liquid amber is full. Its leaves are back now. And it's basically like it never lost its leaves to begin with. Unless you look at the ground and there's the remnant of what once was. In this episode, we're going to have a little bit of Beltane craft and cooking. It's been a little while since we were able to do a video, primarily because nothing was really going on outside. It was cold and wintry, and we didn't really want to revert back to a Yule episode or something like that, where we were getting our hot cocos and putting the heaters on. But it's finally been nice enough for us to get outside and start with the garden again and be able to make things and craft things without it being so cold and rainy and wet we can't do anything. So we hope you enjoy this episode and we'll get into it. Now, every Sabbath wouldn't be complete without the changing of the guards. Changing of the altar. First, we're sweeping away all the old energy, the negative energy that once was, or anything that we don't want around. Sweeping that away and then lighting the smoke, the incense, to cleanse the altar. After we've cleared everything off, we light that incense and have that lit throughout the new altar being created. Just making sure that it's very well cleansed and everything I'm putting on is cleansed as well, because the smoke's still blowing around. But then everything seems to come together nicely. Now, because it's Beltane and Halloween, we decided to keep both items on the altar. Now, we're going to start with a bit of cooking. These are honey cakes, or Beltane honey fritter cakes, and what they're usually done is made and deep fried. So we put all the ingredients to start with into a bowl. I've got my daughter to help, as always. When there's cooking to be done, I enlist the help wherever I can to get out of it. Oh, no, she enjoys doing it, and I like her getting into the kitchen and giving it a go. But we're putting all the ingredients, and I'll have that all listed on the screen there. Mixing that around, trying not to splatter it over everything like we usually do. Making as much mess as we can in the process that I clean up later, of course. But we get all those ingredients added together. We've got the wet ingredients, which is the egg, the maple syrup and honey. And we've got the dry ingredients, which is flour. We've got some cinnamon, nutmeg, clove and salt. And we're adding small amounts of the spices. You can add it to taste as well. If you know these spices very well and use them quite often, you'll know what works in your kitchen and what spices go together nicely for you. We were on the lighter side of these where we could, except for the salt, where we put way too much. But that's okay. We can balance it out later with a bit of honey, which we do. But it's fun to get a little Sabbath cooking done, and we're only beginning at this as well, getting my daughter involved in the cooking, things like that. So we try and do a smaller scope of cooking until we get to intermediate stage, and we'll start putting those videos up. But at this point, I'm just getting my daughter to cook in the kitchen. We're trying out different recipes and having a go at everything. Once the dough's complete, we need to roll it into balls if you can, because it's quite sticky. We did end up adding a little bit of flour, which probably didn't add to the taste factor, but it was easier to get the balls rolled in her hands and to be able to, at this stage, put in the air fryer. We decided we were going to air fry some to try and, well, we don't like deep frying here. If we can help it. So we attempted to air fry them and see what happened. I know it wasn't going to give it that wet kind of oily look, and it probably dried them out way too much. But we tried a healthier option, and in the end we don't think there was that much difference, but the deep fried option did taste a bit better. But for this air frying occasion, we popped them in at 180 degrees for 8 minutes, and we checked them halfway, spraying a little bit of oil on them as well, just to make sure we don't burn them. And she disappears when the mess is ready to be cleaned up, of course. But we sprayed a bit of oil on them and rolled them around in the air fryer just so they didn't stick to the bottom, even though it's non-stick. Normally non-stick still sticks in my world, unfortunately. But after a little while, they're ready to go. It was the 8 minutes we left it in for, and they seemed to be fine. And next we tackled the sauce, which we also destroyed. We put the honey in there with a bit of nutmeg, 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg. But unfortunately we added the water and it was a bit too much. We should have only put a dash of water in there just to loosen up the honey a bit, but it was way too much, and even adding a bit of honey to kind of thicken it up didn't really work. It was just way too runny. Now, if you're going to soak these balls in the honey, that's not too bad. You can do that and pop it in the fridge to kind of moisten them up a bit. But yeah, look, for this particular recipe, it was to drizzle the honey over it, and yeah, it didn't really go as planned when we added too much water. Probably a little bit of water, of hot water, would have loosened it up a bit, but unfortunately we added a little bit too much. So lesson learned there. But it didn't hold us back in the end. We they weren't sweet, so we ended up leaving them in the syrup for a while, and then having them kind of soak in that syrup, similar to Jalam Gulub, I believe. It's an Indian sweet, and it's like a cakey, syrupy dessert. That's what I imagine they probably would have looked a little bit more like had they been not air fried and soaked in the syrup. But we ended up trying it the other way as well, in the deep fry, which we pretty much put butter in the pan and melted the butter and had them kind of toast in that hot oil. It wasn't too bad. We had a crack at it, and lessons are always learned in the kitchen, in our kitchen, and I like that because, you know, we don't normally do such old traditional recipes in our house. I mean, we're pretty much, you know, modern cooking in our kitchen, but to try these old recipes and have a crack at doing them, it just takes you back to what they would have been like. What the tastes would have been like back in the day, when we've become pretty accustomed to fast food here and different tastes from around the world at our fingertips with takeaway. But the way that they used to cook back in the day, they didn't have a lot, and they had to use spices and things like that where they could to really flavour their mundane flour and water and milk. They had to be creative and inventive in the way that they changed the taste of everything, otherwise everything would taste the same. But these balls were pretty nice. They were very similar to gingerbreads without the ginger. It had a little bit of a Christmassy taste with the clove and the cinnamon, clove and nutmeg mix. But definitely nice, definitely nice. Once you get that honey mix, which I'm doing now, the honey mix correct without adding any water, they actually did turn out pretty nicely. They're still not very sweet, but I think that's probably because, as I said, we're accustomed to having taste exactly as we like it. But in those days, they weren't able to just nick down the road and get a chocolate sundae, you know. They had to be creative with cocoa and different spices to make things taste really good. And they became accustomed to those tastes too, you know. What you don't know, you don't know. So if they didn't have chocolate syrup over ice cream at the time, they wouldn't know what they were missing out on, basically. But these are still pretty good and worth the try even though they look like pieces of KFC or popcorn chicken, they still tasted pretty good. Possibly they weren't to be in the oil that long. Maybe I've over deep fried them. I mean, it said golden brown, and they do look golden brown in my opinion. They do look like pieces of KFC too. But, trial and error. I added a little bit of cinnamon on the top of the honey drizzle, and that really added to the taste. It was quite nice. But, we try everything here. We see what we like the best. But it's great, really, getting my daughter to see the old ways of cooking and how things used to taste, 200,000 years ago, really. And we did pretty well. Ladies and gentlemen, honey fritter cakes for Beltane. Enjoy if you dare to attempt it yourselves. And then we attempted our own maypole. My daughter took the reins here again, and we started with a stick from pretty much the backyard. It was laying in the grass, and cleaned it off, and we picked out different coloured ribbons. And the ribbons didn't really represent anything in particular. We just picked the colours that we liked, but I'm sure if you looked into it, there's different colours and crystals and things for Beltane that you can select. A lot of greens and yellow, pretty much fertility colours, celebration colours, fire colours, all of that. So we just went with a rainbow of colours because most maypoles I've seen have a rainbow of colours. But we had basically held on to the ribbons at the top and added them as she went around the pole. And there wasn't that much to it really. We took the last white ribbon and we tied it around the top to keep everything nice, firm and secure. And that was pretty much all there was to it. Yes, you can be more elaborate if you like. I've noticed there's several on Easy to Sew Yourself or Etsy. They've got different ones for sale. But really, the Sabbath's really not that long in our household, so making things ourselves are quite easy where we can, and if we can't, well, we have a crack at it anyway. Whatever turns out, turns out. But there's plenty to buy online, even tea cozies and candles that look like maypole candles. But it gives my daughter a chance to be fun and crafty, even in these going into teenage years. But the altar's complete now with the maypole on there and our Halloween Beltane decorations. And yeah, we're going to celebrate Halloween, and we hope you have a great time celebrating Halloween and Beltane as well, and enjoying, finally, the sun coming out. And hopefully in the next episode we've got more to show you in our witchy garden. Until then, Namaste.